What happens when a country decides to save a dying lake no matter the cost? In southwest China, a lake once smothered by pollution and overwhelmed by unchecked tourism became the center of one of the most aggressive environmental crackdowns in modern history. Over 40,000 tons of waste were pulled from its waters, and what happened next left scientists speechless. But this isn't a fairy tale, it's real. And the story behind it is far more complex and shocking than you might expect. The Jewel of Yunnan, Erhai Lake's rise and fall, tells a gripping tale. In China's Yunnan province, near the border with Myanmar, lies a lake that once looked like something out of a nature documentary. It's called Erhai Lake, and for decades it was praised as a freshwater gem, clean, deep, and seemingly timeless. The lake stretches about 97 square miles, nearly the size of Salt Lake City. It sits at 6,470 feet above sea level, surrounded by the towering Kangshan Mountains on one side and the historic city of Dali on the other. To locals, it's more than just scenery. Known as the Mother Lake, Erhai has been a lifeline for the region's Bai ethnic minority for centuries. They fished in it, farmed with its water, and worshipped near its banks. Entire village routines revolved around the lake's cycles, and for a long time, those cycles seemed eternal, but not anymore. In the early 2000s, something shifted. Dali, a city of old temples, tiled rooftops, and slow-paced living, caught the attention of China's booming middle class. The rise of domestic tourism turned Erhai from a tranquil retreat into a trendy destination. Millions of visitors arrived, looking for mountain lake views and social media-worthy sunsets. Between 2013 and 2016, the number of annual tourists shot past 40 million. That's more than the population of California packed into one small region each year. Local entrepreneurs responded quickly. Farmhouses were converted into boutique hotels, lakeside plots were turned into rooftop bars, and entire villages transformed into what some reporters called Instagram towns. In Shuanglang, a lakeside area once known for fishing, more than 1,800 guest houses emerged. It was rapid, exciting, and completely unchecked. The problem was, much of this development happened without oversight. A large portion of the new businesses skipped formal permits, and with them, sewage systems. According to an internal government report later cited by Chinese media, hundreds of guest houses and cafes were dumping untreated wastewater directly into Erhai or into roadside ditches that led to it. Grease, soap, bleach, raw sewage, it all found its way into the lake. Solid waste piled up too. During peak seasons, tourists generated thousands of pounds of trash per day, including plastic bags, bottles, and food scraps, many of which ended up near or in the water. Local insiders said the infrastructure simply wasn't built to handle the surge. The municipal sewage system was outdated, garbage trucks couldn't keep up, and as long as the money kept flowing in, few wanted to ask hard questions. On the surface, Erhai still looked pristine. Drone shots of the lake were everywhere. Still, waters, distant mountains, swans gliding past paddle boats. But that beauty was deceiving. Fishermen who'd worked the lake for generations began returning empty-handed. One of the clearest signs of trouble came in the form of thick green slime, algal blooms covering parts of the lake in spring and summer. They were fueled by nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus leaching from fertilizer runoff and sewage. Water samples showed rising chemical levels. Oxygen levels dropped in deeper zones. Native aquatic plants began to vanish. One species, Otelia acuminata, once found in abundance near the shoreline, nearly disappeared. Locals noticed the change. Farmers reported weird smells in their irrigation. Ditches. Tourists complained of a musty odor along certain stretches. Guest house owners quietly installed indoor air filters to keep reviews positive. Some simply closed without warning. Xiao Ying, an environmental scientist interviewed by a Yunnan-based NGO in 2016, called the situation an invisible collapse. On a map, Erhai looked fine, but biologically, it was starting to flatline. Despite mounting evidence, the response was slow. Local officials issued vague statements. Media coverage was scattered. Developers and landlords kept building, banking on the next high season. By 2016, the cracks were no longer subtle. In some sections of the lake, water visibility dropped to less than 3 feet. Swimmers and paddlers reported floating trash and oil slicks. Certain fish populations dropped by over 60% in less than a decade, according to a study later cited in regional reports. Still, few realized how close the lake was to disaster. Most tourists came and went without noticing. Even residents, while concerned, had gotten used to the new normal. Then came the tipping point. In early 2017, behind closed doors, the local government drew a line. What followed would be one of the largest environmental crackdowns in recent Chinese history. They would shut down businesses, bulldoze structures, build new pipelines, and most dramatically, they would pull over 40,000 tons of waste from the lake basin, the shoreline, and its feeder streams. What they found during that process, and what the lake looked like after, stunned even seasoned scientists. And that's where the real story begins. The tipping point. By 2016, the signs were no longer subtle. Erhai Lake, once a national treasure of biodiversity and natural beauty, was reaching its breaking point. What had been whispered in environmental circles for years was now playing out in the open. The water was changing. The life inside it was vanishing. And this time, the damage couldn't be hidden behind filtered travel photos or polished tourism slogans. The first unmistakable alarm came in the form of a thick green scum that spread across the surface in the spring of 2016. It was blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria, a toxic organism that thrives in nutrient-rich, oxygen-poor water. When it blooms, it multiplies fast, covering lakes in mats that choke sunlight, suffocate fish, and make the water dangerous to touch. Locals had seen small patches before, but this time the bloom was massive, visible from the air, stretching for miles, thick enough to coat fishing nets and swamp boat motors. It wasn't just unsightly, it was lethal. According to field research shared by a Yunnan University ecology team, the bloom contributed to a sharp die-off of native aquatic plants, most notably Otelia acuminata, a flowering species found only in Yunnan's plateau lakes. Otelia helped oxygenate the water and served as a habitat for dozens of microorganisms. Its collapse was a red flag for researchers who knew what it meant. The lake's ecological balance had been broken. That year, environmental technician Li Xiaoyun conducted shoreline tests for a nonprofit water watch group. Li described the results as worse than expected, noting phosphate and nitrate levels at nearly double the safe limit in certain sections. "We were looking at a freshwater system on the verge of collapse," she later told reporters. And it wasn't just the plants and fish that were suffering. By late 2016, the water quality around Erhai had slipped to what Chinese environmental agencies classify as Category 3 or 4, on a scale where 1 is pure drinking water and Category 5 is virtually unusable. For a lake that supplied irrigation to farms and fed countless small fishing boats, this was a quiet catastrophe. Fishermen saw their catches drop year after year. In one lakeside village, multiple families gave up fishing entirely and converted their boats into makeshift tour vessels, hoping to keep their livelihoods afloat with sightseeing trips instead of nets. Farmers noticed strange colors and odors in the canals that fed their rice paddies. Several reported that vegetables watered from the lake grew more slowly or developed spots that made them unmarketable. For them, this was about losing the foundation of their economy. Residents started getting worried, then angry, then suspicious. If the lake was deteriorating, why weren't the authorities acting? The truth is, they were watching too. By the end of 2016, local officials in Dali could no longer ignore the problem. According to an internal municipal memo later leaked to reporters, an Erhai environmental risk review had determined that Erhai's pollution posed a long-term threat to regional stability and economic viability. The local government was under pressure from all sides. Tourism investors feared bad publicity, residents were demanding answers, and Beijing was signaling that environmental negligence would no longer be tolerated. In early 2017, they made a decision. It was time to hit the brakes hard. On March 1, 2017, the Dali government announced one of the most sweeping environmental crackdowns in recent memory. There would be no more half measures. This wasn't about installing a few filters or launching a PR campaign. This was about reasserting control. The entire eastern lakeshore, the epicenter of unregulated development, was targeted for an immediate shutdown. All construction near the lake was banned, and more than 2,400 businesses were ordered to close, including guest houses, cafes, bars, and rental properties. There were no exceptions. For some business owners, the news came without warning. Electricity was cut off overnight, and notices were stapled to doors at dawn. In Shuanglang, workers in orange vests began dismantling illegal structures less than 24 hours after the announcement. The goal was clear: stop the bleeding. To many outsiders, the suddenness of the crackdown felt surreal. One week, the lakeside. Towns were humming with tourists sipping tea under parasols. The next week, streets were silent, cafes were gutted, and bulldozers stood where menus used to hang. For residents, it was disorienting. Some welcomed the crackdown, believing it would finally save the lake they'd grown up beside. Others were devastated. Their livelihoods had disappeared in a single announcement. There were no appeals, no delays. The lake came first. Official statements framed the closures as part of a broader plan to restore ecological harmony and preserve Erhai for future generations. But the mood on the ground was tense. Not everyone trusted that the government had a real plan, and no one knew just how bad the lake had become. That question, how bad, would soon get an answer. As the shutdown took effect, environmental assessment teams fanned out across the lake. Their job was to measure the damage, take samples, and map pollution hotspots. In time, they would organize what would become one of China's largest aquatic restoration projects. But in those first few weeks, they were just trying to understand the scope of the disaster. One of the researchers from Yunnan Normal University, Chen Ruyi, described the effort as diagnosing a patient in critical condition. Every river, every inlet, every ditch flowing into Erhai was examined. The findings weren't just concerning, they were overwhelming. Tons of garbage had collected at the bottom of feeder streams. Sewage outflows, some buried under years of growth, were still quietly leaking waste. Algae was blooming deeper and earlier than ever before. The Great Purge began. When the crackdown hit Erhai Lake in early 2017, few people outside the region understood just how deep the damage ran. The closures and construction bans were only the beginning. The real work, the work that would test local resolve, logistics, and political will, was just beginning. 40,000 tons of waste, equal to the weight of about 6,500 elephants, was not suspended in giant piles on shore, but buried beneath water, tangled in reeds, embedded in stream beds, and festering in drainage canals. It was everywhere. By summer 2017, cleanup crews had assembled across multiple zones around Erhai Lake. These weren't just local sanitation teams. This was a coordinated, militarized effort involving thousands of workers, dredging machines, flatbed boats, vacuum pumps, and waste-hauling trucks. Their mission was to extract every trace of solid waste they could reach. That included plastic debris, sunken trash, industrial scraps, decomposed organics, and thousands of tons of sediment saturated with phosphorus and nitrates, the key ingredients behind Erhai's devastating algal blooms. Some of the worst concentrations were found in the tributaries, The Luxiang River, which feeds into the north end of the lake, was a particular hotspot. Its banks were lined with informal dump sites that had gone unchecked for years. Cleanup crews waded into ankle-deep sludge, collecting sacks of rotting waste by hand where machines couldn't reach. According to project supervisor Wang Lele, the sheer volume of waste was underestimated at first. What we found in the first few weeks shocked even the local engineers. Wang said in a later interview, "There were sections of the lake bed where the mud was black from decay. It had no oxygen. It smelled like sulfur." In many areas, dredging was the only option. Barges equipped with long mechanical arms began scraping the lake bottom, lifting out sediment mixed with decades of runoff and debris. Special attention was given to areas near former guest houses, where raw sewage had been dumped directly into the lake from now defunct pipes. Within months, convoys of dump trucks began lining the lakeside roads, carrying away wet sludge to newly built treatment sites outside the city. But cleaning the lake was only half the battle. To prevent recontamination, Dali needed a full-scale infrastructure reboot, something far more ambitious than plugging holes or patching pipes. The centerpiece of this reboot was the construction of a 19-mile sewage pipeline network encircling the lake. This pipeline acted like a defensive moat, but against human waste. The idea was simple: capture every drop of sewage from homes, hotels, and farms around the lake and divert it to processing facilities before it had any chance of reaching the water. To make it work, dozens of auxiliary pumping stations were installed at low points along the shore, ensuring that runoff, gray water, and even storm overflow were intercepted. Entire blocks of old plumbing were ripped out and replaced. In some villages, homes were temporarily evacuated so underground systems could be modernized. By late 2018, multiple wastewater treatment plants had been built or upgraded to handle the inflow. These plants could process tens of millions of gallons of water daily, using sedimentation tanks, biofiltration systems, and UV disinfection to remove pollutants. According to insiders with the Dali Environmental Engineering Bureau, the new facilities marked a turning point. For the first time in years, there was a functional barrier between human activity and Erhai's fragile ecology. But the most visionary part of the restoration plan didn't involve machines or pipes. The most visionary part of this plan involved wetlands, or more accurately, building new ones. As part of the Erhai Lake Ecological Corridor project, planners began converting hundreds of acres of degraded shoreline into artificial and semi-natural wetlands designed to filter water before it entered the lake. Wetlands are nature's water purifiers. Their plants absorb nitrogen, trap sediments, and provide crucial habitats for wildlife. In Erhai's case, they also helped stabilize banks and slow the flow of tributary rivers that carried pollutants downstream. Nearly 2,000 acres of land around the lake were targeted for transformation. That included planting native reeds, aquatic grasses, and algae-absorbing flora. The Luoxijiang River saw the construction of multiple stepped filtration zones, essentially green barriers where water is slowed and cleansed before it reaches open water. It wasn't just an ecological fix, it was a visual one too. Concrete riverbanks were torn out and replaced with winding walkways and wooden footbridges. Birdwatching platforms went up. Locals who once dumped trash in these areas were now picnicking. By them. Biologists were brought in to monitor the new growth. Dragonflies returned. Frogs, water birds, and slowly, tentatively, small schools of fish. Behind the scenes, data flowed constantly. Dozens of sensors were installed around the lake to monitor water quality in real time. Metrics like dissolved oxygen, ammonia levels, turbidity, and chlorophyll content were tracked hourly. Every time a new zone was dredged or a treatment station came online, researchers logged changes in the chemistry. The results guided strategy. Some areas needed more aggressive sediment removal. Others responded better to wetland expansion. Meanwhile, enforcement remained strict. Patrol boats scanned the lake daily. New surveillance cameras were installed at key inflow points. Farmers and businesses were warned. Violations would be met with immediate shutdowns. Even livestock farms miles from the lake were required to install biogas digesters and convert waste into safe byproducts, preventing runoff from ever reaching air high. It was, in the words of environmental planner Zhou Jing, a war on pollution, fought on every front, technical, social, and political. By the end of 2019, the pipelines were running, the wetlands were thriving, and for the first time in a decade, the lake's color began to shift from murky olive to pale blue. There were no fireworks, no parades, just fewer algae blooms, more fish, cleaner banks. The most important shift wasn't visible to the naked eye. It was chemical. It was biological. It was real. Air High Lake was no longer dying. And after all this, after China removed 40,000 tons of waste from this lake, came the results that left scientists in shock: the astonishing transformation. By the time the heavy machinery left Air High's shores and the last dredging barge docked, no one expected miracles. After all, lakes don't bounce back overnight, especially not after years of sewage, silt, and ecological stress. But then the big news came. In late 2020, technicians monitoring the lake's transparency noted a sharp improvement. For years, the water had hovered in murky territory, often with just inches of visibility. But now, readings were coming in at over 7.5 feet in some areas. It wasn't a fluke, and everyone, including President Xi Jinping, knew it.